They never arrive with a name. These hidden beliefs, they settle beneath the surface, like sediment in a dark canal where no light reaches. We live them before we recognize them. We suffer by them long before we speak them. And even then, when we find words, they deny their presence, disguising themselves as reason, caution, humility. But make no mistake, they are the quiet architects of our ruin. The first, I am not allowed to want. It begins in childhood, often before memory. A gesture punished, a need ignored, a gaze met with cold detachment. And slowly we learn, desire invites pain. To want is to be exposed. To want is to be vulnerable. So we bury the wanting, not the object of desire, but the desire itself. We learn to need less, to expect nothing, to make starvation feel like virtue. And in doing so, we sever ourselves from the motor of life libido, the fundamental driver not just sexual, but psychic, creative, expansive. What is a life without desire but a slow suffocation? A resignation dressed up as maturity. We become spectators of existence, applauding others for their courage while retreating behind a mask of detachment. We call it realism. We call it humility. But it is cowardice in disguise. Repression is not nobility. It is a form of internal exile. The second belief, if I speak, I will be abandoned. Silence is not just absence of speech, it is a strategy, a defense, a bargain made in terror. Somewhere along the line we learn that honesty invites distance, that truth disrupts, that our anger, our sadness, our confusion will not be received, but punished. So we become experts in swallowing. We master the smile that says, I'm fine, even as we fracture inwardly. The psyche, like the body, cannot digest what it is forced to swallow forever. The unsaid becomes symptom. The unspoken becomes neurosis. Panic attacks, compulsions, dreams riddled with unprocessed rage. We think we are keeping the peace, but we are paying for it with our health, our intimacy, our authenticity. And in this silence, we lose not only others but ourselves. For what am I, if not the sum of what I dare to say? The third, pain is proof I am alive. There is a certain addiction to suffering, one we inherit, not consciously, but psychically. When pleasure is fleeting, when joy feels unsafe, pain becomes our anchor. At least it is familiar. At least it confirms our existence. We equate intensity with truth. If something hurts, it must be real. If something is easeful, we suspect it. And so we replicate pain, unconsciously. We choose partners who echo our early wounds. We sabotage opportunities just when they appear within reach. We keep reopening old wounds not because we want to suffer, but because we've mistaken suffering for love, because we fear what lies beyond the pain. Who might I be if I no longer defined myself by what I've survived? This belief binds us to the past, trapping us in cycles we call fate, but they are habits of the unconscious, not destiny. The fourth, if I succeed, I will be punished. This one hides well. It sounds absurd to the conscious mind. Who would sabotage their own ascent? But beneath the threshold of awareness, the child remembers. The envy of a parent, the ridicule of a sibling, the betrayal of peers who couldn't bear to see us shine. Success then becomes dangerous. It threatens belonging. It invites judgment. So we dim, we delay, we find clever ways to fail. We procrastinate, implode, over-perfect, burn out. All to avoid the psychic guilt of outgrowing those who taught us that greatness is isolation. But true maturity means enduring that guilt, understanding that we do not abandon others by becoming ourselves, that our light need not cast shadows on those around us. It can illuminate, but only if we dare to stop apologizing for our potential. And the fifth, I am what happened to me. Perhaps the most insidious belief of all, the conviction that our identity is synonymous with our trauma, that the past is not only part of us, but the whole of us. We wear our wounds like skin. We narrate our pain until it hardens into personality. But the self is not a museum of injuries. The self is a process, a becoming, an unfolding. Yes, the past lives in use, in gestures, in fears, in reflexes. But it does not define the borders of our possibility. We are not sentenced to reenact the same dynamics. The unconscious is not a prison. It is a landscape, and if we walk it consciously, we can find exits, paths, openings where there once were only loops. But to do this, we must descend, not into fantasy, but into memory, not into motivation, but into mourning. There is no bypass. The way out is through the body, the history, the lie that says you must stay quiet, small, safe, and in this descent, you will meet the parts of yourself you exiled long ago. The child who screamed and was ignored, the adolescent who was told ambition was arrogance, the adult who still flinches at love's approach. They do not need to be fixed. They need to be heard, witnessed, held. There is a reason Freud called it the talking cure. Not because speech magically heals, but because speech reclaims. Each word brings the unconscious into light. Each truth, however painful, breaks the spell of silence, and with it, the spell of repetition. You are not your defenses. You are not your compulsions. You are not your father's disappointment, your mother's fear, your culture's shame. You are the one who can see all this and still choose differently. That is the beginning of freedom, not the absence of conflict, but the presence of consciousness. And consciousness hurts. It strips away the alibis. It asks that you renounce the comfort of victimhood. It demands responsibility not for what was done to you, but for how you now live. That is the hardest part, because if you admit you have a choice, then you must also admit you've been choosing not to choose. But within that burden is power, the power to begin again. Not as a blank slate, but as a person who has walked through fire and remembered their name. Destiny is not a path we follow. It is a pattern we break. The unconscious does not resist change. It resists exposure. Once the light enters, the lie unravels. Slowly, painfully, but inevitably. So now I ask not your rational mind, but the deeper youth, the one who dreams and remembers and aches. Which belief are you ready to confront? Which ghost are you ready to unmask? Which silence are you finally willing to break? Not for the world, not for applause, but for the simple, quiet act of returning to yourself, where your desire waits, where your voice still trembles, where your life, your real life, has been waiting all along. This is not a solution. It is a summons. And still, the descent deepens, because it is never just one belief, one wound, one moment of betrayal that defines the structure of our inner life. It is the layering of thousands, like geological sediment pressed over decades. Every silence piled upon the last. Every time you felt too much and were told it was too loud. Every instance of shrinking that felt like safety. The soul becomes a compression of accommodations. And what we call our personality is often just the sum of all our survival strategies carefully arranged so we don't disturb the sleeping lions within. But they stir. Always. Because repression is not deletion. It is displacement. It is the psychic equivalent of hiding rot behind drywall and pretending the house is whole. The symptom leaks through. In your anxiety, your fatigue, your persistent sense that something is missing, in your attraction to people who hurt you in familiar ways, in the life that appears full from the outside but tastes of ash inside your mouth. And if you're quiet, truly quiet, you can hear it. The knocking from below, the unconscious, demanding to be met, not with judgment, not with solutions, but with the radical, dangerous act of attention. We are taught to fear our depths, to call them darkness, madness. But what we fear is not the unconscious, it is what it reveals, that we are not masters of our own house, that there are desires in us we never chose, that there are losses we never mourned, that our rage is older than our language, and our shame not even ours to begin with, and so we avoid the mirror. We fill our days with noise, our nights with distraction. We turn every silence into a screen. We fear what might emerge in the quiet, but it is the quiet that heals, because only in stillness do the echoes reach us. There is no liberation without recognition. We must look at what we once had to look away from. We must re-enter the scene, not to relive it, but to reclaim it. The gaze of the parent who looked through you, the teacher who humiliated you in front of a room, the betrayal that taught you love was conditional. These moments are not past, they live in you, directing your choices like a hidden script. And so long as they remain unexamined, they will continue to dictate your path, no matter how far you run from them. The past is never past until it is spoken. To speak is to rupture the enchantment, but it must be the right kind of speech, not performance, not catharsis for its own sake, but a speech that listens while it speaks, that does not explain itself away, that does not seek pity or permission, but says, "This happened, I felt this, I carry it still," and in that simple act, the lie begins to loosen, the belief that you are unworthy, the belief that you must always earn your place, the belief that if anyone truly saw you, they would leave. These are not truths, they are injuries frozen in time, but they do not need to define your fate. There is no ego strength without mourning. We must grieve not only what we lost, but what we never had. The parent who never protected, the safety that never came, the love that was always contingent, and hardest of all, the version of ourselves who could have bloomed under different conditions. That grief is sacred. It is not weakness, it is the very beginning of self-possession. Only when we mourn the fantasy can we begin to live the reality, and in that space, a new self begins to stir not the self who performs, who adjusts, who earns, but the self who simply is. You must be willing to disappoint the internalized voices, the ones that say, "Don't be too much. Don't be selfish. Don't ask for more." Those voices are not yours. They were planted. And they have calcified into your superego, Freud's word for the part of the psyche that polices us with inherited rules, not from morality but from fear. You must disobey them, gently, repeatedly, until your nervous system learns that safety does not come from obedience, it comes from integration, from knowing that every part of you, yes, even the angry one, the needy one, the terrified chilled, has a place in the whole. Healing is not a return to innocence. It is the forging of coherence. We do not aim to erase the past, but to metabolize it, to make it part of our narrative, not the author of our destiny. The past, once integrated, becomes wisdom. But when split off, it becomes symptom. Every unexplored corner of our psyche finds expression somehow, in our relationships, in our compulsions, in the ways we sabotage our peace and call it fate. So we must descend, again and again, not once, not as a project, but as a practice of remembrance, of reintegration, of reclaiming what was disowned. Do not look for transformation in sudden light. It rarely comes that way. Look for it in the slow softening of your defenses, in the moment you pause before reacting, in the breath you take before abandoning yourself again, in the way you begin to hold your own gaze in the mirror without flinching. That is the work. That is the reconstitution of the self layer by layer, truth by truth, wound by wound. There is no map, only the will to see. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest thing. We inherit the belief that someone else will come to save us, that one day the pain will stop on its own, that clarity will arrive like a revelation. But the unconscious does not work that way. It is a labyrinth with no external guide. Only you know the turns, the doors, the forgotten rooms. Only you can walk it. Others can walk beside you, but no one can walk it for you. And to even begin requires a betrayal of the fantasy that healing is painless, that change is instant, that clarity comes without confrontation. Clarity is what remains after illusions burn. So, let them burn. The belief that you must be perfect to be loved, the belief that you must prove your worth at every turn, the belief that safety lies in control. These are not protections, they are prisons. And the door was never locked. It was your belief that kept you inside. Step through, not away from fear, but with it. Let it tremble, let it speak. It is not the enemy. It is the part of you that still believes you are in danger. Show it otherwise, again and again, until even your fear begins to trust you. Because that is the turning point, not the moment you are no longer afraid, but the moment you stop abandoning yourself in the face of fear. You may still falter, still regress, still hear the voices telling you to shrink. That is not failure. That is the work. The psyche is not linear. It spirals. It returns to the wound until the wound is no longer a command, until the past becomes context, not sentence, until the pain becomes part of your story, but not its author. And when that happens quietly, imperceptibly, you begin to live from a different place, Not from the echo of trauma, but from the possibility of presence. Not from defense, but from contact. Contact with others. Contact with reality. Contact with the strange, aching beauty of being fully alive. You will not be perfect, but you will be whole. And that is the beginning of true freedom. Wholeness does not promise relief. It promises truth. And the truth is not always kind. It will not flatter your defenses. It will not coddle your illusions. It will take the parts of you you've spent years protecting and place them under light tenderly, relentlessly, until you can no longer pretend they are not there. And still, you must look. Not because it feels good, but because not looking costs more. Costs time, costs peace, costs love. The longer you avoid the truth of your own structure, the longer you remain at the mercy of what you do not name. The unconscious is not cruel. It is loyal. It preserves what the psyche was not ready to feel, but eventually, the debt comes due. Symptoms are the interest paid on unprocessed experience. They are the body remembering what the mind would rather forget. Insomnia, panic, chronic guilt, the inability to rest, these are not random. They are messages, from you to you. The nervous system calling out through the only language it has left. And yet we medicate the signals, spiritualize the symptoms, intellectualize the ache. Anything to avoid the simple, terrifying possibility that what you feel is real, that what happened mattered, that your pain is valid, and more than valid, necessary. For pain, when fully felt, becomes instruction. It teaches boundaries. It reveals what you love. It points to where you were betrayed. But only if you allow it to speak. Only if you refuse the temptation to bypass, to numb, to fix. The deeper you go, the more seductive the fantasy of escape becomes. If I just change my mindset, if I just find the right person, if I just forgive and move on. But the soul does not negotiate. It will not be silenced by slogans. It will not be healed by performance. It waits, patiently, beneath the noise, beneath the story, beneath even the pain. There it is, yourself, raw, intact, undestroyed. You are not broken, you are layered. Layered with adaptations that once kept you alive, and now suffocate you. This is the paradox of trauma. What saved you then, sabotages you now. The silence that protected you from harm now isolates you. The vigilance that once detected danger now prevents rest. The people-pleasing that once secured attachment now erodes your identity. These strategies are not flaws, they are brilliance misapplied. Genius turned against itself. But now you are no longer that child, no longer powerless. You can choose what to carry, you can choose what to release, but only if you see it. And to see it, you must turn inward, not to judge, but to understand. There will be resistance. Of course there will. The unconscious is not a passive territory. It defends its contents like a fortress. Every time you near a truth too large, a silence too deep, the defenses will rise. Distraction, numbness, sudden fatigue, anger. The mind will do anything to keep you from remembering what hurt too much to feel. And you must move gently, not with force, but with presence. Sit with the part of you that wants to run. Ask it what it's afraid of. Listen, that part has kept you alive. It deserves respect, but not obedience. Because you are no longer surviving. You are becoming. Becoming someone who can hold complexity, who can feel pain without being consumed, who can desire without shame, who can mourn without drowning, who can speak not to please but to express. That is what it means to live with an integrated psyche, to move through the world not as a reaction to the past, but as a response to the present. To respond means to stand in the middle of your own experience and choose. Choose to show up, choose to stay, choose to speak, to feel, to risk. Not because it guarantees safety, but because the alternative hiding has become too costly. You will lose people. Let them go. Not everyone will want your truth. Some preferred the version of you that needed them, that stayed silent, that kept the peace. But peace without authenticity is not peace, it is submission. And love that requires your suppression is not love, it is dependency. You do not owe anyone the preservation of their comfort at the expense of yourself. This is not cruelty, it is honesty. And real intimacy requires it. The courage to be fully seen, the integrity to fully see. Anything less is performance. But first, you must be willing to see yourself. Not as an ideal, not as a brand, but as a living, pulsing contradiction. You are tenderness and rage. You are longing and fear. You are the child who wasn't held, and the adult learning to hold themselves. You are the protector and the protected, the mask and the face beneath. There is no need to resolve these tensions, only to allow them, to live them. Integration is not harmony, it is coexistence. The capacity to hold paradox without collapse, to feel doubt and move anyway, to carry pain without being defined by it. And slowly, through this process, you will remember what was never truly lost. Your vitality, your dignity, your voice, not the loud one, the real one. The quiet, steady whisper beneath the roles, the trauma, the shoulds. The voice that says, I am here. I have always been here, beneath the fear, beneath the shame, waiting for you to return, not to who you were before the pain, but to who you are because of it. There is no redemption arc. There is only contact. With what you ran from, with what you thought you had to become, with the naked, trembling truth of your own psyche. This is the work. To descend, not once, but always. To make of your pain a path, not because suffering is noble, but because it is real. And what is real is the only place from which life can begin again. So we keep going. We keep looking, we keep listening. Because in the end, it is not freedom we seek, it is self-possession. The ability to stand inside our own experience and not flinch. To feel the full weight of our inheritance and say, yes, this too is mine. But it is not all I am. And in that moment, quietly, irrevocably, the future begins. The future does not arrive with fanfare. It does not break through like light in a cathedral. It unfolds in silence, in the small refusal to abandon yourself again. In the moment you hear the old voice rise and choose not to obey. In the way you begin to speak even when your throat trembles. In how you stay, when every instinct tells you to flee. The future is built in these quiet rebellions, these acts of psychic defiance, not against the world but against the learned belief that you do not deserve to be whole. You do not become someone else. You return to who you were before you were asked to disappear. Before you were taught that your anger must be hidden, that your joy must be measured, that your intuition must be doubted. Before the world pressed itself into your skin and called it identity. What we call healing is not invention, it is excavation. Not improvement, but remembrance. The psyche does not require perfection. It requires truth. It requires that we stop betraying what we know in our bones. That we stop editing ourselves into acceptability. That we stop apologizing for what we are. You were never too much. You were just surrounded by those who were too little to hold you. And now it is your task to become the one who can hold what they could not. To turn toward the parts of you that were denied your grief, your desire, your hunger for meaning and say, yes, you belong. Not because they serve a purpose, but because they are you. Wholeness begins where utility ends. When you no longer ask every feeling to justify itself. When you stop managing your emotions like liabilities and start welcoming them as messengers. And yes'em will arrive ugly. Jealousy, rage, terror. But even these are not evidence of your failure. They are evidence that something in you still burns, still reaches, still refuses the numbness that was offered as survival. These are not signs of regression, they are signs of life. But life hurts, because to feel is to risk, to open is to bleed. And still, we must, because the alternative, the slow death of avoidance, is far more costly. Every truth you suppress becomes a symptom. Every feeling you dismiss becomes a pattern. Every part of you you exile becomes a stranger whose voice echoes through your relationships, your body, your dreams. To silence the self is not peace, it is fragmentation. The psyche cannot bear that fracture forever. So the work is not to fix, but to welcome. To sit with what you were told to cast out. The need that made you needy, the anger that made you bad, the sadness that made you weak. You must reclaim them all. Because they are not flaws, they are signals, vital signs. And when you listen, truly listen, They do not scream. They soften. They become guides. This is not a metaphor. It is biological. The nervous system responds to the truth. It calms when the body knows it is being seen, heard, held. When you stop gaslighting your own pain, your body stops preparing for war. Healing is not a miraculite, is a physiological response to safety. And safety begins not in the arms of another, but in the arms of your own permission. Permission to feel, to want, to need, to fail, to be messy, to be complex. You do not need to earn rest. You do not need to justify your sadness. You do not need to hide your hunger for something more. You need only allow. And in that allowance, the system begins to recalibrate. The psyche, once splintered, begins to cohere, slowly, unevenly, but inevitably. Because truth, once known, cannot be unknown. You can try to forget, to return to the masks, but the body remembers, the dream knows, the ache returns. Not to punish you, but to invite you back to the path, back to the wound, back to the place where you left yourself. Again and again, life will offer you this chance, to stop running, to stop pleasing, to stop pretending, and to begin the terrifying, beautiful work of being real. There is no arrival, only deepening. Each layer you shed reveals another. Each truth you speak uncovers more. There is no final version of you, only versions that are more honest, more integrated, less afraid. The self is not a product, it is a process, and you are not behind, you are not late. You are exactly where the wound needed you to return. You are exactly where your voice broke, where the silence began. And now, you get to choose differently. You do not need to be ready. You need only be willing. Willing to look, to feel, to stay, even when it burns, especially when it burns, because the fire does not destroy you, it tempers you. It purifies what was false. It reduces the noise until only the essential remains. And that essence, that still, small, undestroyed core is who you have always been. You were never broken, only buried. Buried beneath beliefs that were never yours. Buried beneath roles you performed to survive. Buried beneath the shame of needing what others could not give. But now the burial is over. Now the excavation begins. And it will not be easy. But it will be worth it. Because what you find when you are finally done running is not perfection, not certainty, but presence. The capacity to meet yourself again and again without turning away. That is the work. That is the return. That is how destiny is reclaimed, not by waiting, not by wishing, but by unlearning everything that told you to forget who you are. And so we reach the threshold, the end that is not an end, but a quiet return. Not to innocence, that is gone, and not to wholeness, as the world sells it shiny, curated, uninterrupted, but to a kind of knowing, the kind that does not scream, it whispers. Beneath the noise, beneath the stories, beneath the roles you've worn until they fuse to your skin it waits. The real you, not the aspirational self, not the version you curated to be accepted, not the one who performs healing like a role but the one who has always known. The one who remembered what you loved before you were told what was acceptable. The one who felt everything, deeply, before the walls were built. The one who still speaks through your dreams, your longings, your sudden griefs that seem to come from nowhere. You thought the journey would lead you to answers. It hasn't. It's given you something far more difficult and far more honest, yourself. With your ache, your beauty, your untranslatable contradictions, there is no mastery here. No arrival, just a deepening fidelity to what is real, and the courage to live it without apology. You now understand. Your suffering was not weakness, it was information. Your defenses were not flaws, they were love, misdirected. Every symptom, every rupture, every false start was the psyche's way of trying to bring you back to this contact with your own inner life, with the parts you banished, with the truth that destiny was never out there. It was always buried in the silence you were too afraid to break. And now, maybe, you are no longer afraid. Not because fear is gone, but because you've learned to walk with it, to listen without obeying, to feel without collapsing. That is freedom, not the absence of pain, but the presence of self through it. That is maturity, not performance, but integration. That is the quiet destiny you reclaim, not the one you chase, but the one you uncover by refusing to look away. You are not what happened to you. You are not your trauma. You are not the beliefs that once kept you safe and now keep you small. You are the one who sees, the one who chooses, the one who stays. So go now, not outward, but inward. Live your truth, not for them, not for legacy, not for the myth of transcendence, but because it is yours, because nothing else will ever fit. This is the end of forgetting, and the beginning of your return.